some of my songs I have casually mentioned the fact that I like to drink beer.
Part of the reason I got into making bread and my own pickles and beer and meat and all this stuff is because I like knowing what's in my food and also where it came from. So like if I know the farmer that grew the cabbage and he picks it and gives it to me and I make sauerkraut out of that, like just the peace of mind of knowing that, I love. But also understanding my food is a big reason I got into it. But before I go off about fermented things, I'm Eric Jones. I've been home brewing for 8 years on my own. My dad's been brewing my whole life, so I've been around beer making for a very long time. My wife and I are both certified beer judges. There's a program called the Beer Judge Certification Program. You could all become beer judges. I've been doing that for 3 years. I'm a national judge, and I even grade exams for future beer judges now. So I know way more than most people should about beer, although I come at it from more of an artistic cooking side. I'm interested in flavors and sources of flavors much more than I am the science. You should all become beer judges. It is the coolest job. I think a lot of us tend to think of fermentation as just producing alcohol. A lot of things that we consume are fermented. Like right now, you are having a fermented beverage because coffee is fermented. After the beans are picked, they are the husk and film is eaten off by bacteria, and that develops flavors. Fermentation is the best friend of anyone who's a vegetarian because it produces all sorts of complex and rich flavors that you don't get from the ground meat. The formal definition that I have on here is that it's an enzymatically controlled transformation of an organic compound, which is really boring. Really, it's a bunch of little bacteria or yeast having sex and eating and making things taste better because of it. Alcohol is basically yeast poop. In the end, that's what it is. So if you want street cred, have a fermentation project. So beer. Beer is pretty simple stuff. It is water, malt, hops, and yeast. That's it. This stuff right here is your best friend in the world. It's yeast. When lager yeast is done doing its thing, it settles at the bottom, whereas ale yeasts are top and really warm fermentation. So historically, ale yeast would do their thing, and then when they were done, yeast basically goes dormant, and it would settle at the top of the beer. That's how straws were invented, because they wanted to taste and see when it was done, and they needed to get below the yeast cap. So that's how we ended up with straws, not to drink Coca-Cola. So knowing the temperature of the culture that you're using is pretty much the key to fermentation. So the brewing process is you start with barley. Most beer is barley. Barley is malted, and the malting process is basically it's soaked in water and it starts to sprout because barley is just a seed. And when it gets to a certain point, it's dried out, it's thrown into a kiln and roasted. So it kills off the seed basically. So you have yeast corpses, or seed corpses. And the reason that you sprout it is because enzymes activate in the barley to start converting the starch into sugar. So the barley becomes malt. And what you want from that is the enzymes and the sugars. The enzymes are going to create the sugars, basically. And sugars are what the yeast is going to eat. There's other things that are going to carry through into the beer. There's proteins and non-fermentable sugars. There's going to be dextrins and things like that. So not 100% of the sugars produced is fermentable, but that's the reason that there's sweetness left in your beer. If you had 100% fermentable, you would have, well, ethanol, pure ethanol, which is kind of gross. Think about every flavor. So like you have this chain of carbohydrates. A long chain is going to be a starch. The enzymes are going to chop these up. And so a simple carbohydrate is a sugar because it's more digestible, easier to access and create energy from. And yeast is unable to access this long chain. So you need the enzymes to turn the starch into sugars. So here is a roasted a dark roasted barley. That doesn't really have much enzyme activity left because you've killed it by roasting it. That's roasted at 500 degrees. After that's been in for 10 minutes, you pull it out, let it drain up a little bit, never squeeze it, because then you're going to get all sorts of husks and proteins and things that are going to make your beer taste bad. So you just let it drain, and then once it gets to a boil, put in your malt extract. And you have your mostly white beer. So if you like booze, I'm a good guy to know. Come over and drink.